A police officer and his battle-scarred K9 were driving a snow-covered road at dawn when Max, the dog, suddenly froze, ears high, eyes locked on the tree line. That's when they saw it. A flicker of flame curling through frost-covered branches, a van, burning, and beside it, a woman collapsed in the snow, clutching a bundled infant in her arms, not moving, not breathing. What they did next unraveled more than just a rescue. It uncovered a truth buried beneath forged signatures, shattered trust, and a name the officer never thought he'd see again. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about betrayal, redemption, and a dog who saw through the lies before anyone else. Night had long swallowed the city, a small snow-buried town tucked deep in the northern backbone of America, the kind of place where names fade faster than footprints in the frost, and winter comes not just with cold, but with weight. The sky hung low and swollen, like a ceiling about to break, and the wind moved through the trees with the breath of ice, pine, and something faintly metallic. Not quite blood, but not far off either. A warning whispered through the dark. Officer Ethan Cole adjusted the wool collar of his uniform jacket as he drove slowly along County Road 16, his patrol cruiser making the only tire tracks on the newly fallen snow. The defroster hissed low, fogging the windshield's corners, and the dashboard clock blinked in the silence. Beside him, in the passenger seat, sat Max, a 5-year-old German shepherd with thick black and silver fur, intelligent amber eyes, and the poised tension of a seasoned sentinel. Max's right ear was nicked from a training incident years ago, and a faint scar ran along his left hind leg, a remnant from a collapse during his early K9 days. Dismissed from his original unit for excessive instinct, Max was reassigned to Ethan, the only man willing to take on a dog labeled unpredictable. But Ethan knew better. Max wasn't erratic, he was intuitive, and tonight his body had gone still. Without warning, Max stood on all fours, nose pressed to the window, tail stiff, ears perked toward the trees. Then he let out a guttural bark, sharp and urgent. Ethan gripped the wheel tighter. "What is it, boy?" Max barked again and pawed at the door. Ethan slowed to a crawl, pulling off to the side. The cruiser's headlights barely pierced the swirling snow, but through the trees, a dull orange glow pulsed against the night, like a slow heartbeat. Smoke. He jumped out, boots crunching against the frozen road, and Max leapt down beside him. The glow led them off-road, down a shallow embankment into the woods. Max moved fast, weaving through trees, his growls low and constant. Ethan followed, breath forming in puffs, gunlight flicking left and right. Then he saw it. A dark SUV lay tilted at the edge of a frozen creek, front end crushed against a pine tree. Smoke leaked from under the hood, and snow steamed off its surface. Ethan raised his flashlight. At the rear of the vehicle, crumpled in the snow, was a woman. Young, thin, limp, her arms wrapped protectively around a bundle of cloth. Max beat him there, sniffing wildly at the woman's side, then barking once, loud and commanding. Ethan dropped to his knees. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. Her lips were blue. Hair, chestnut brown, tangled and wet, clung to her pale face. Her skin was nearly the same color as the snow. Ethan gently pried open her arms and gasped. A baby. No older than a few days, wrapped in a hospital-issue blanket, face ghostly pale. But there, a twitch, a breath, a cough. "Max, get the trauma kit!" Max darted toward the cruiser, disappearing into the trees. Ethan checked for pulses. Both alive? Barely. He unzipped his coat and pulled the infant inside, pressing the tiny body against his chest for warmth, then slung his patrol jacket over the woman. Then Max barked, a different pitch. Ethan turned. Max stood between him and the SUV, fur bristling, eyes locked on the vehicle. Then Ethan saw it, flickering beneath the hood. Fire. Fast. His heart stopped. "Max, back!" The shepherd bolted. Ethan grabbed the mother under her arms, hoisted her as best he could, with the baby still pressed against his chest. His legs screamed as he trudged uphill through snowdrifts, Max circling him protectively. Behind them, the SUV burst into flame. The explosion rocked the earth, heat chasing them even as Ethan collapsed behind a snowbank. Max covered the three of them with his body, shielding them from flying debris. For a moment, there was only sound, the crackle of fire, the distant wail of sirens, and Ethan's own breath, ragged and stunned. 20 minutes later, emergency lights lit up the tree line. Medics rushed in, sled gurneys gliding across the snow. Ethan sat on the bank, arms around the woman and baby, his uniform burned at the sleeves. "I found them just before the fire hit," he told the EMTs. "If it weren't for him—" He looked at Max, who was now sitting a few feet away, snow melting into his thick coat, eyes watching the forest. A young paramedic, Olivia Tron, early 30s, Vietnamese American, small frame with steady hands, checked the baby's vitals. "She's lucky," Olivia said gently. "So are you." Max didn't move when a fireman tried to pat his head. He simply stared. "Something's bothering him," Ethan muttered. "Trauma, maybe?" Olivia offered. "No," Ethan replied. "He's not looking at the fire. He's looking beyond it." Back at the cruiser, Ethan checked the dashboard cam. As he rewound the footage, something flashed across the screen at timestamp 2 hours, 52 minutes, and 13 seconds. A figure, barely visible, moving away from the SUV just minutes before it exploded. Tall, hooded, limping. Ethan's jaw clenched. Max had already turned to the trees again, ears pinned forward, as if he'd smelled something familiar. And Ethan knew then, this wasn't just an accident. This was the beginning of something else. The hospital room was a quiet chamber carved out of cold sterility. Pale green walls stood washed in the dim blue glow of a bedside monitor, its beeping steady, patient. Outside the window, snow still drifted, soft and silent, blurring the lines between buildings and sky. Inside, warmth returned slowly to the woman who had nearly died in the snow. Hannah Walters stirred. Her fingers moved first, twitching beneath the crisp sheet. Then her eyelids fluttered open, heavy with sedation. For a moment, she stared up at the ceiling tiles without memory, the world a blank pane of frost. Then pain came, a dull ache in her ribs, a burning in her throat, and with it, a name, torn from her lips like a breath held too long. "Emma!" A nurse appeared beside the bed. She was tall, late 40s, with warm brown skin and silver-streaked hair pulled into a low bun. Her badge read, Marissa Langdon, RN. There was something calm about her movements, the practiced stillness of someone who had walked through more than a few stormy nights. "You're safe," she said gently, adjusting the IV line. "Your daughter's alive. She's in NICU, getting stronger." Hannah blinked again, this time with recognition, her body tensed. "Where is she?" Marissa gestured toward the door. "Just across the hall. You were both brought in last night by an officer. Said you were found in the woods beside a car fire." Hannah flinched at the word fire. Images returned in shards, snowflakes like needles, the scent of gasoline, a man's voice yelling, hands grabbing her, and then blackness. She tried to sit up. I need to talk to someone. Please, a detective or the officer who found me. I don't remember everything, but something wasn't right." Marissa placed a hand on her shoulder. "You'll have a visitor shortly. He's been waiting." A moment later, the door creaked open. Officer Ethan Cole stepped in, still in uniform, coat dusted with flakes. His eyes were drawn and tired, the kind that had spent hours staring through both snow and doubt. Behind him, Max padded in silently, his black fur still damp from patrol. He walked straight to the foot of the bed and sat, eyes on Hannah like a sentinel reporting for duty. Ethan nodded once. "You're lucky to be alive, Miss Walters." Hannah looked down at Max, then up at Ethan. It wasn't luck. It was him. Ethan allowed the corner of his mouth to twitch. He has a habit of showing up in the right places. "Do you remember anything from last night? What happened before the crash?" She inhaled slowly, wincing. "Some. Enough." Ethan pulled a chair to the side of the bed, Max still unmoving. "My name's Hannah Walters. I worked as an assistant accountant for the city's infrastructure office. I was compiling reports for the year-end audit and found discrepancies in the redevelopment fund. Huge sums moved between fake companies. I flagged them. Next thing I knew, I was called into the mayor's office." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Victor Dane?" She nodded. He didn't say much, just that I'd misunderstood. He asked if I had copies. I lied, told him no. Her hands clenched in the sheets. That night, someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything. They didn't need to. I think they were looking for the flash drive. I panicked, took Emma and left town with the files. I was driving north when the lights hit me from behind. A truck. Black. No plates. It forced me off the road. Her voice cracked. Then, I remember being dragged. Something pressed against my face. I held on to Emma and prayed they wouldn't find her. That's the last thing I remember. Ethan didn't interrupt. He just let it sit. You have the flash drive? Hannah blinked, then slowly reached to the edge of her hospital gown. Sewn beneath the hem was a hidden pocket, and within it, a silver drive no larger than a key. I sewed it in after I lied to Dane. It's encrypted, but the files are real. Contracts, transfers, company names. Some signed by me, but I never signed them. Ethan took the drive gently, eyes thoughtful. You realize this puts you directly in their crosshairs. I already was. A knock sounded at the door. Olivia Tron, the EMT from earlier, leaned in. She wore navy scrubs now, her short black hair pulled back, a clipboard in hand. Sorry to interrupt. Baby Emma's vitals are stabilizing. Would you like to see her? Hannah's eyes welled. She nodded, voice thin. Please. Olivia led them across the corridor. The NICU was warm and quiet, soft lullabies humming from hidden speakers. Emma lay in an incubator, swaddled, a tiny oxygen tube fixed beneath her nose. Her cheeks were pink now, her chest rising evenly. Max walked straight to the glass and sat, tail curled neatly. His eyes never left the baby. A different nurse approached. She was young, mid-20s, fair-skinned, with strawberry blonde hair pulled into a high ponytail. Her name tag read Jenny. She smiled awkwardly, avoiding Max's eyes. As she reached to adjust the monitor above Emma's incubator, Max growled low in his throat. Jenny froze. Olivia turned. Something wrong? Max stood, placing one paw against the base of the glass, growl growing sharper. Ethan stepped forward. Jenny, what were you doing? Jenny hesitated. I was just checking the oxygen levels. Ethan studied her face, nervous, too nervous. Max barked once, sharp and final. Jenny stepped back. Look, I didn't do anything wrong. Ethan reached for his radio. Jenny bolted. Before anyone could react, Max surged forward. Ethan shouted, Stay! But Max was already through the NICU door and into the hall. Ethan chased after him, radioing security. They caught Jenny at the east stairwell, her bag containing an empty syringe and a printed photo of Hannah, with the word confidential stamped across the top. Back in the NICU, Hannah stood shaking, one hand pressed against the glass, eyes fixed on her daughter. She knew me. She was sent, Ethan said grimly, and Max knew first. He looked down at the dog, who now sat silently beside the incubator once more. Whatever this is, it's deeper than fraud. The morning after Jenny's arrest, the air outside the precinct was bitter, but Ethan Cole felt the cold from somewhere deeper, not on his skin, but in his bones. He stood beneath a skeletal elm tree in the precinct courtyard, steam curling from a paper cup of gas station coffee. Max sat nearby on the icy concrete, his tail curled neatly over his paws, eyes scanning the horizon like a soldier between battles. There was a faint pink tint to the sky, but no warmth in it. Inside, the investigation was beginning to stir. Ethan knew he was out of his depth with financial crimes, so he placed a call he hadn't made in 2 years. Nora Grant. She arrived less than an hour later. A woman in her late 30s, Nora was average in height, but carried herself like someone 3 inches taller. Her features were sharp, olive-toned skin, straight black hair in a sleek bob, and eyes that gave nothing away unless she allowed it. She wore dark jeans under a camel coat, a gray laptop bag slung over one shoulder, and a face that didn't ask permission. She and Ethan had once worked together in narcotics until Nora transferred to a joint federal financial task force. Their falling out had been quiet, a disagreement on a case followed by silence. But now, her tone was professional. You said you've got something worth looking at? Ethan handed her the flash drive Hannah had hidden in her gown. She said it's encrypted, contracts, signatures, and a bunch of fund transfers. Nora plugged the drive into her secure laptop and raised an eyebrow. You trust this source? She almost died for it, Ethan said, and someone sent a fake nurse to finish the job. As the files loaded, Nora frowned. This header, City Redevelopment Fund, Red Pines Development, that company's popped up before. Max rose from his seated position and walked to the edge of the room, sniffing at a cabinet against the wall. He gave a soft growl, tail still. Ethan looked at him. "Something up?" Nora followed Max's gaze. "That cabinet's the city's old case archive. They moved most records to digital 2 years ago, but anything pre-2021 would still be in there." Max barked once, not aggressively, but with intent. Ethan opened the cabinet. Dust drifted as he pulled out a few old files. Nora reached past him and retrieved a thick manila folder labeled 2021 Infrastructure Budget Adjustments. She flipped it open and stopped cold. "There," she pointed. "Signature of Hannah Walters. But look, same contract ID number appears again, 2 pages later, signed by someone else." Ethan narrowed his eyes. They recycled the contract, just changed the signatures. Nora pulled out a magnifier lens from her bag, tracing the ink strokes. "This one's printed, not hand-signed, ink's fresh. And if I'm not mistaken," she sniffed the page, "this is heat-sensitive toner. You can tell that by smell." "I've worked enough cases where printers lie more than people." She flipped to the next page. "These were printed less than 48 hours ago. Somebody wanted to slip these into the archive." Max sniffed again and then scratched at the floorboard beneath the cabinet. Curious, Ethan knelt and wedged a pocket knife into the slat. It popped loose, revealing a narrow cavity. Inside lay a burned piece of plastic, partially melted, blackened. A micro SD card. Nora stared at it. "That doesn't belong in a government building." Ethan nodded. "Can you recover anything?" "Maybe. Depends how much heat it took." As Nora slid it into a recovery reader, her jaw tightened. "There's a file here, corrupted, but I've seen this before. Similar extension to encrypted audio logs. Hang on." The screen flickered. Then, static, and a voice. "She's talking too much. If she delivers that file, it's not just the mayor on the line. It's the whole damn operation." Nora hit pause. "That voice, that's Richard Leyland. He was Victor Dane's campaign advisor. He vanished 6 months ago. Rumors were he ran off with donor funds." Ethan leaned closer. "You think this was recorded by Hannah?" "Could be, or someone who didn't live long enough to share it." She looked down, thoughtful. "This reminds me of another case." She opened a new folder in her laptop. 1 year ago, we lost a whistleblower, a journalist named Caleb Marsh. He'd been investigating zoning corruption tied to Red Pines development. Weeks before he died, he claimed he'd been followed. Then his car was found burned on I-88. They said it was an accident. "You believe that?" "No," Nora said, "but I didn't have this." She clicked a file. A photo appeared, a press image of Caleb Marsh. Late 30s, lean, glasses, wide smile. She opened another, the charred remains of his sedan. The back seat melted to frame. No child seat, no groceries, no signs he'd been planning a trip. Just ash. "They killed him," Nora said. "Now they're trying to do the same to Hannah." Max growled again, this time facing the glass door of the precinct. Outside, a black SUV idled across the street, windows tinted. No plates. Ethan's fingers moved to his hip. "Stay here," he said. Max followed him out the door. But as they reached the curb, the SUV peeled off, snow spraying in its wake. Max let out a single bark and stared long after the vehicle disappeared into the city. Back inside, Nora watched the screen. "There's a pattern here," she murmured. "Red Pines, North Valley Trust, forged contracts, burned cars, missing names. This isn't just about a mayor skimming funds. It's a machine, a pipeline." She looked at Ethan. "We need access to the city planning office records, but they won't let us walk in the front door." Ethan's eyes drifted to Max, who still stood alert, ears perked. "Then we find another way in." The snow had thickened again, falling in lazy spirals beneath a colorless sky. Ethan Cole sat alone in the dim interior of his cruiser, parked just outside the municipal vehicle lot on the south edge of the city. Beside him, Max lay still on the seat, eyes open, ears forward. The engine hummed quietly, a brittle heat climbing from the vents. Ethan stared through the windshield, jaw locked, thoughts louder than the static on the police radio. The city fleet records had always been public, but the logs in the binder he held now were handwritten, not digital. Sloppy. Deliberately so. A red circle had been drawn in ink around 2 vehicles. both SUVs, both registered to city planning, both recently decommissioned, and both with insurance policies mysteriously canceled 2 days before their respective accidents. One had been involved in a rear-end collision with a city electrical pole. The other, Hannah's. Ethan flipped the page. Victor Dane's covering his trail with paperwork, he muttered, or someone's doing it for him. He closed the binder and rubbed the bridge of his nose. His eyes burned. He hadn't slept in more than 24 hours, but there was no time for that now. "Let's go home," he said to Max. By the time they pulled into his driveway, night had begun to bleed into the corners of the sky. His house sat at the edge of the neighborhood, a modest cabin-style home with timber siding and a single overhead light that cast pale halos on the fresh snow. He turned off the ignition and reached for his thermos. Max barked once. Ethan looked up. Max was standing rigid, nose pressed to the side window, tail stiff. A low growl vibrated from his chest. "What is it, boy?" Max bolted across the seat, pawing at the door. Then Ethan saw it, a blinking red light, faint, nearly lost beneath the rear undercarriage of the cruiser. His heart froze. He didn't think, just moved. He flung the door open and yelled, "Out! Max! Out!" Max leapt from the car just as Ethan scrambled backward, 10 feet, then 20. The blast knocked him flat. The cruiser went up in a plume of fire and steel, a thunderclap tearing through the silence of the woods. Shards of glass and metal fanned out like a weaponized snowfall, embedding into the snowbank and nearby fence. Heat washed over Ethan's face as he shielded his head with both arms. Then came the ringing. Then Max. The German Shepherd returned at a run, unharmed but wide-eyed, sniffing Ethan from boots to shoulders, whimpering low. Ethan coughed once, rolled to his back, and looked at the flaming wreck of his patrol vehicle. "That's twice now," he rasped, "and both times you saved me." He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he spent the next hours in silence, standing shirtless in the garage, breath fogging in front of him, tools scattered on the workbench, cameras mounted at all 4 corners of his property. It was something he had meant to do years ago after a burglary that nearly cost him his father's watch. But, like most things in his life, he hadn't finished it. Until now. The new cameras were infrared and motion activated, all synced to a monitor in his office. At 3:12 a.m., the system pinged. A single boot print. Ethan froze. On the far north side of his house, where Max had barked the night before, a shadow had crossed the perimeter. The figure didn't break in, didn't leave a mark, just stood for 23 seconds in the snow and left. Ethan enlarged the image. Tall, slender, gloved hands, hooded parka, a faint limp. It wasn't a ghost. It was a message. At sunrise, Ethan met with Nora again, this time at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. The place was small, with aging brick walls and a chipped wood counter. Nora sat at a corner table with her coat still on, sipping bitter black coffee. Her expression tightened when she saw Ethan's singed jacket. "Your cruiser? Exploded in my driveway," Nora swore under her breath. "You're being hunted." He sat down across from her, Max settling under the table between them. A waitress approached, petite, mid-50s, wearing a green apron and a tired smile. Her name tag read Lana. She asked if they wanted anything else, then returned quietly to the counter. Nora leaned in. "We found something else. One of the forged contracts from the archive. The listed vendor, Greenhawk Materials. It's a shell, traced to a P.O. box rented by someone named Devin Clark." "Who's he?" Nora tapped her pen against the mug. "Former fire inspector, dismissed last year. Internal memo cited behavioral concerns and unauthorized building access. But get this. He was assigned to the city vehicle depot and fuel lot for 2 years. You think he's the one wiring these bombs? Maybe, or he trained the guy who is." Ethan's knuckles whitened. "I want to talk to him." "Not so easy. Clark went off-grid. No forwarding address, no known relatives. Only mention we found was a parking citation near the scrapyard, 3 weeks ago." Ethan stood. "Then that's where we go next." Later that day, Ethan pulled up the cruiser's black box data from the night of the explosion. The system had survived the blast, barely. What it revealed was simple and terrifying. The explosive device had been armed using a low-frequency trigger synced to the vehicle's reverse camera. It would have detonated the moment Ethan backed into his garage. if Max hadn't seen the light blinking and stopped him. Max lay at Ethan's feet, eyes half shut, but ears twitching every few seconds. Ethan reached down, brushing a hand over the scar behind the dog's left ear. "You don't miss anything, do you?" Max didn't answer. He didn't need to. The scrapyard on the outskirts of the city was where machines went to die. Acres of rusting metal stretched in every direction. Skeletal frames of buses, sedans, and city vehicles stacked like tombstones beneath a slate sky. The snow hadn't reached this place properly. Its filth and oil repelled even winter. Ethan Cole stepped through the bent gate with Max beside him, the dog's breath misting in the cold as he sniffed low to the ground, tail straight and alert. "This is where the trail ends," Ethan muttered. The information had come from Nora. Discreetly, as always. She'd found a record of a parking citation issued to a vehicle registered to Devin Clark at this very location. But it wasn't Clark Ethan was thinking about. It was a name buried deep in an old ledger Nora had cross-checked the night before. Russell Crane, former chief accountant for the city's infrastructure board. A man Ethan had once shared coffee with during budget meetings. Quiet, balding, with wireframe glasses and a perpetual nervous smile. Crane had vanished 18 months ago. No note, no investigation, just silence. Ethan hadn't thought of him since. Now, his name had resurfaced, alongside a transfer of $1.2 million to a shell account under North Valley Trust. "Max," Ethan whispered, "find him." Max moved without hesitation. He wove between stacks of gutted pickups and twisted vans, his paws crunching over frozen gravel and scrap metal. Every so often, he'd stop, sniff the air, adjust course. Ethan followed close behind. Then Max froze. In the center of the yard stood a weather-stained SUV, its tires flat, windshield spidered with cracks, and snow pooled across the roof. It was unremarkable, except that Max began to growl, a low, deep warning sound. One Ethan had only heard twice before, both times in the face of something wrong. Ethan approached the rear of the vehicle. The license plate was gone, but the model matched Crane's, an older blue Saturn Vue. Rust curled around the trunk edges like rot. Ethan tried the door. Locked. He circled to the passenger side, pulled open the front door with effort. The hinges screamed. The interior was moldy, ice clinging to the dash. Then something caught his eye, behind the passenger seat, jammed between broken floor mats. A box, black plastic, heat-sealed. Max stepped closer, whining softly. Ethan reached in and pulled it free. Inside was a wrapped external hard drive, coated in soot and faint traces of blood along one edge. Next to it sat something smaller, a thin velvet pouch. He opened it. A silver wedding band. His. He blinked hard, confusion and disbelief washing over him. That ring had been lost 3 winters ago, during a house fire Ethan had helped contain. His wife had passed the year before that. The ring had slipped off in the snow as he scrambled through debris. He'd never found it. No one had. But here it was, inside a car that once belonged to a man presumed dead. Max growled again, snapping Ethan back into the present. The dog's nose had turned toward the far side of the lot. Ethan looked and saw a shack. Rusted walls, boarded windows, a door left ajar just enough for suspicion. Hand on his sidearm, Ethan approached. Inside, it was dark and damp. Tools hung from bent nails. Grease stains marked the floor in black swaths. A propane heater clicked faintly in the corner, and on a workbench sat photographs. Dozens of them. Surveillance shots. Ethan's house. Hannah's hospital window. Nora outside the courthouse. Each marked with red wax pencil notes. "Someone's been watching all of us," Ethan muttered. Then came a sound. A click behind him. He spun. A man stood in the doorway, early 60s, tall but stooped, salt and pepper beard covering sunken cheeks. His clothes were layered, brown coat over flannel, jeans stained with oil. His eyes were sharp, despite the wear. And they were afraid. "Who are you?" Ethan asked. The man raised both hands. "Don't shoot. I'm Russell Crane." Ethan stared. "You're supposed to be dead." Crane lowered his hands slowly. "I almost was." Max didn't move, only watched, as though reading Crane's soul through posture and breath. Crane sat down on a metal stool, hands trembling. "They came to me, Dane and his people, said if I signed a few things, I'd retire early with a bonus. but I started asking questions. Next thing I knew, someone followed me home. 2 nights later, my brakes failed. Ethan's jaw clenched. Why didn't you come forward? Because they planted evidence, said I stole city funds, said I'd go to prison, so I ran. I've been here ever since, watching, listening, trying to gather enough to bring them down before they find me again. Ethan placed the pouch and hard drive on the table. This yours? Crane looked at the ring. No, that's what made me believe, that someone else had been watching me too. Ethan nodded slowly. We need to get you out of here, somewhere safe. No, Crane said. You need to get what's on that drive into federal hands. That's what matters. I can stay off the radar. But that thing, he pointed to the hard drive, that's the chain tying all of them together. North Valley, Red Pines, and Dane. Outside, Max barked. Ethan turned. Tires on gravel. Too late. A black sedan appeared at the edge of the yard. Crane bolted toward the back exit. Ethan grabbed Max by the collar and ducked behind a scrap truck. Bullets snapped into the metal above them. Max barked again, snarling, muscles coiled. Ethan fired once toward the vehicle. It peeled off, tires shrieking, disappearing the way it came. He turned back, but Crane was gone, vanished. The warehouse stood silent in the pale morning light, flanked by dead trees and sagging fences. It used to store industrial piping decades ago. Now it was just another ghost in the city's shadow. Snow crunched under Ethan Cole's boots as he stepped into the clearing with Max beside him, the dog's black coat streaked with melting frost. Ethan's jaw was set, expression unreadable, but his fingers twitched ever so slightly at his belt. He was ready. The previous night, Ethan had driven to a small government field office 2 towns away. Far from the surveillance net Dane had spun across their city. He handed the charred hard drive to Special Agent Malcolm Reeves, a tall black man in his late 40s with thick brows, a graying goatee, and a demeanor carved by years of undercover work. Reeves had reviewed the drive, leaned back in his chair, and muttered, "You just lit a fuse under a powder keg." Now the trap was set. The message had gone out. $200,000 in hush money, hidden at the old Belridge warehouse. A former city councilman, actually a deep undercover agent, posed as the nervous go-between. The FBI would surround the location quietly, waiting for Dane to make a mistake. And Ethan? He volunteered to walk in. Inside the warehouse, it smelled of dust, copper, and mold. Shafts of light pierced through broken panels in the roof, casting pale gold beams onto the concrete floor. Ethan stood near a crate marked "Fragile," pretending to check the duffel bag filled with fake cash. He felt Max's steady presence at his heel, silent but sharp, his dark eyes never resting. A car rolled up, doors slammed. Then footsteps. 3 sets. The first to enter was Victor Dane himself. Tall, square-shouldered, early 50s. His dark hair was slicked back, salt creeping at the temples, and his tailored wool coat clung to him like arrogance. His face, though once considered handsome, had grown crueler over time, a mouth that rarely smiled, eyes that rarely blinked. Behind him were 2 bodyguards. One was Jace Morrow, a man built like a wall, mid-30s, shaven head, thick neck, a broken nose that had never healed right. The other, a wiry man named Colton Hale, had twitchy eyes and a nervous tick of cracking his knuckles. He looked like a man who followed orders because he feared his own mind. Dane's gaze landed on Ethan, who stood still with one hand resting on the bag. "You've got nerve," Dane sneered, "dragging me out here like this." Ethan didn't flinch. "You wanted silence. I brought it in cash." Dane gestured, and Morrow stepped forward to check the bag. Max let out a low growl. Dane's eyes flicked to the dog. "Still dragging that mud around, huh?" Ethan's voice was ice. "He's the only one who's never lied to me." Colton handed Dane a phone. "Clear," he said after a brief scan. Dane took a step forward. "Tell me, Officer Cole, do you really think you can win this? You think anyone will believe the word of a burned-out cop and a dead accountant?" Ethan's eyes didn't move. "They don't need to believe us. They only need to believe the data. And the data doesn't lie." Dane's smile turned brittle. He reached into his coat. "Max," Ethan whispered. Everything moved fast. Dane pulled a handgun, sleek, black, and silenced. He pointed it straight at Ethan's chest. But Max moved faster. With a deep guttural snarl, Max launched himself across the space between them, jaws snapping onto Dane's gun arm. The shot fired, but it missed, slamming into the crate behind Ethan. Dane screamed. Max held tight, biting into muscle and cloth, forcing the weapon down. That was the moment. The warehouse exploded in movement. FBI! Drop your weapons! Voices roared. From the rafters, side doors, and shattered windows, agents flooded the room. Malcolm Reeves at the lead. Morrow reached for his gun, but was tackled. Colton dropped his before anyone even shouted. And Dane, cursing, bloody, was forced to the ground with Max still snarling above him. It was over in seconds. The agents cuffed all three and began reading rights. Reeves approached Ethan, nodded once, then turned to Max. "Good dog," he said softly, pulling out a bandage kit. That's when Ethan noticed the blood. Max's right shoulder was wet, dark red streaking across his fur. The gunshot had grazed him just enough to break the skin, maybe worse. "No, no, no, no!" Ethan knelt, voice cracking for the first time. Max licked his face in response. They took him to the emergency vet near the city center. The staff moved quickly. No questions, just action. As they worked, Ethan sat outside the operating room on a bench that felt colder than the snow outside. His hands trembled, his mind ran wild. He hadn't cried when the fire took his house. He hadn't cried when his wife's heart failed in her sleep. But when they brought Max out, bandaged and groggy, resting against his chest, with that same old loyalty in his half-lidded eyes, Ethan broke. The tears came like a dam split wide. "If it wasn't for you," Ethan whispered, "I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have seen the truth. I'd be dead in that garage or shot in that warehouse, and the city would still belong to him." Max, weak but conscious, nudged his head against Ethan's ribs and let out a slow exhale, as if to say, "I know," as if to say, "We're not done yet." Outside, snow began to fall again, quiet, steady, soft. But this time, it felt like cleansing. 3 weeks had passed since the warehouse raid, and the town, once cloaked in silence and suspicion, was now buzzing with something foreign. Hope. The courthouse stood stoic under a pale winter sun, its old stone facade dusted with snow. Reporters clustered outside like crows waiting for a signal. Inside, Victor Dane sat handcuffed, his once pristine suit wrinkled and damp under the harsh fluorescent lights. The man who had walked the city like a king now slouched, his face gray, his eyes empty. The courtroom was packed. Among those present was Hannah Walters, sitting in the second row with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her dark auburn hair now brushed and parted, her cheeks fuller. Though she still bore faint shadows under her eyes, there was a new steadiness in her gaze. She held her daughter Emma, now recovering well, dressed in a white onesie with tiny gold stars. Ethan Cole stood near the front, not in uniform, but in a plain black coat and dark jeans. His posture was as straight as ever, but his eyes looked softer, like someone who had made peace with shadows. Beside him, on a leash fashioned from paracord, was Max. The German shepherd sat tall and silent, his shoulders still wrapped in a clean bandage. A bad-shaped patch had been sewn onto his harness. K9 Valor Unit, Max. His gaze scanned the room like a sentinel, but now and then he leaned gently into Ethan's leg. When the judge read the charges, conspiracy to commit murder, public corruption, destruction of public property, misappropriation of emergency funds, Dane's jaw twitched. He offered no plea. The evidence was too overwhelming. In a statement to the press, Special Agent Malcolm Reeves commended the cooperation between federal and local law enforcement, but most of his praise was reserved for a man who refused to look away, and a dog who refused to back down. A week later, the town gathered at Memorial Square. The snow had been cleared, but the air still carried winter's edge. A stage was erected at the far end of the plaza. Rows of folding chairs lined the space, and a bronze curtain draped a tall object beneath the town's central flagpole. Ethan stood behind the curtain, not used to ceremonies or speeches. He'd shaved for the occasion, his square jaw clean, dark hair combed neatly, though the scar on his left brow still caught the light. Hannah stood to his left, dressed in a navy coat, her baby snug against her chest in a wool sling. She hadn't spoken much since testifying, but her presence beside Ethan now said more than words. Mayor pro tempore Renee Carter, A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked black hair and a firm voice took the microphone. "Today," she began, "we honor two protectors who didn't wait for backup. In a time when our city was sinking in silence, they brought the truth screaming into the light." With a soft flourish, the curtain was pulled away. The statue beneath was life-sized, a bronze rendering of Max, crouched beside Ethan in full police uniform, hand outstretched. Max's mouth was open in mid-bark, muscles tense, forever poised in action. On the plaque beneath were the words, "Not all heroes wear badges, some carry 4 legs and an undying soul." The crowd erupted in applause, some clapped, some wept. Ethan looked down at Max, who was sniffing the base of the statue with interest. "You approve?" Ethan whispered, and Max gave a soft woof, tail thumping once. Later that day, Hannah invited Ethan to tour the new facility. The building was once an abandoned animal shelter, now renovated into a clean, sunlit space with training yards, therapy rooms, and a small memorial wall. A wooden sign over the front door read, "Max's Path, Rescue and Renewal. Kids with trauma, veterans, dogs rescued from fire zones or war-torn areas," Hannah explained, her voice still quiet but stronger. "We train them to save others, just like Max saved us." Ethan nodded, running a hand over the new pine wood desk in the lobby. "You sure you want to stay here?" he asked. "I've never been more sure," she replied. That night, Ethan stood on the porch of his cabin, the fire crackling behind the windows, baby Emma sleeping in a carrier against his chest. He looked down the snowy hill where Max lay under the oak tree, eyes watchful as ever. The silence was no longer haunting. It was peaceful. He had filed the adoption papers 3 days ago. Emma would be his daughter now, a second chance, not to replace what he lost, but to honor it. As the stars blinked above the town that nearly buried its secrets, Ethan knew something sacred had emerged from the fire. Not vengeance, not justice, but truth, and those brave enough to carry it, even on 4 legs. Spring came late to the northern town, as if winter had fought tooth and nail to keep its grip on the land. But at last, the snow began to melt, revealing damp earth and brittle grass underneath, and birds had returned to the trees. The sun lingered a little longer each evening. Change was unfolding slowly, not in great announcements, but in moments, quiet, warm, and true. It was the first day of a new season at Max's Path. The facility had grown. What was once a modest shelter was now a vibrant hub nestled between whispering pine trees and thawing meadows. Its front gates stood open, welcoming visitors and trainees alike. Above them hung a wooden sign freshly repainted after the winter, "Max's Path, Rescue and Renewal." The training yard buzzed with anticipation. A dozen young dogs, rescued from various corners of hardship, trotted eagerly on leashes beside their human counterparts. Among them were children, teens, a few war veterans, and even a retired nurse with silver hair tied back in a blue scarf. At the center of the yard stood Max. The black German shepherd was older now, the silver streak from his injury gleaming faintly beneath his left shoulder. The scar hadn't slowed him. In fact, it had made him regal. He moved with calm authority, weaving through the line of trainees with ears perked and tail low, his presence a wordless command. "You are safe here, but you must be brave." Ethan watched from a few steps away, his arms crossed over his chest. He wore a gray jacket and boots stained with old mud, his dark beard trimmed neatly. The lines near his eyes had softened since the investigation ended, but there was still something weathered in his gaze, a look forged by pain and mended with purpose. He nodded once to Hannah, who stood nearby with Emma in her arms, now 8 months old and healthy. Hannah wore jeans and a forest green sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She carried herself with quiet resilience, no longer the frightened woman Ethan had found beside a burning car. She was co-director now, overseeing Max's Path with the same fierce devotion she once gave her whistleblowing. "Max has them all lined up like a drill sergeant," she said softly, watching the shepherd circle the group. Ethan smiled. Old habits. Among the new trainees was a boy named Lucas Monroe, 15 years old, slender, with pale skin and unruly brown curls that peeked from under a wool cap. His eyes were gray, not dull, but cautious, like someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. Lucas had arrived at the center 2 weeks ago. He rarely spoke, rarely made eye contact. He had lost his father the previous year in a bridge collapse. Since then, he had drifted between grief counselors and silent nights, locked in his room with only the sound of the wind for company. His mother had brought him to Max's path as a last attempt. Now, Lucas stood beside a timid mixed-breed pup named Juniper. The dog had wiry brown fur, oversized ears, and a soft whimper when separated from Lucas. During the first exercise, basic obedience across a marked field, Lucas hesitated. Juniper tugged gently at the leash, unsure. Ethan, observing from a distance, approached with deliberate care. "Try this," he said gently, handing Lucas a small biscuit. "Kneel beside her. Don't command. Just show her you're staying." Lucas obeyed. As his knees touched the cold grass, Juniper inched forward, pressing her head into his chest. Ethan stepped back. That was when it happened. Lucas smiled. Not a big grin, just the slight upward curl of his mouth and a flicker in his eyes. But it was real. For the first time in months, it was real. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat on the porch steps of the main building. The spring wind carried the scent of pine and wet earth. Max lay beside him, head resting on Ethan's boot, eyes closed. Ethan looked down at the shepherd. "We've seen hell, haven't we, old boy?" Max thumped his tail once. "I thought I'd lost everything," Ethan continued. "But then you showed up. You didn't drag me out of the fire just once. You've been doing it every day since." Max opened one eye and gave a faint grunt, as if to say, "And I'll keep doing it." A moment of silence passed between them, sacred and still. Ethan reached down and scratched the soft spot behind Max's ears. "There's a kind of light only gatekeepers see," he murmured, almost to himself. "You taught me that." From behind them, laughter rang out. Lucas was playing fetch with Juniper. Hannah waved from the training yard, and Emma squealed in delight from her carrier. Ethan rose slowly, his joints stiff from old injuries, but his steps sure. Max stood too, his movements deliberate but strong. Winter had ended. Not just the season, but the long, bitter cold that had nested in Ethan's chest for years. There would still be battles ahead, broken lives to mend, truths to protect. But now, there was a path. A path marked not by medals or parades, but by muddy paw prints and the quiet turning of hearts. And as Ethan walked back toward the field, with Max at his side and the wind at his back, he understood something simple and deep. Loyalty doesn't age, and love, once earned, never fades. Some say it was luck, others fate. But maybe it was something greater. Maybe the reason Max barked that night, the reason Ethan turned his head, wasn't just training, it was grace. A quiet miracle, sent not with thunder, but on 4 steady paws and a whisper of snow. Because sometimes God doesn't shout. Sometimes he sends a dog. If this story moved your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe again. That loyalty still exists, that justice still matters, and that love can rise from ashes. Tell us in the comments, do you believe in miracles? Hit that subscribe button, and may God bless every heart that watches this.